Reverend Marla and Patty are away on a much-deserved vacation weekend, and so we are fortunate to have Reverend Michael Boger here as our guest speaker again. And I am Monica McDowell-Elvig. I'm usually up here as your center administrator or elf, depending on the Sunday. But today I'm helping to lead service, and I'm glad to do that. A little bit about Michael, if you don't know him. Reverend Michael has studied and taught the classical religious texts from many religious traditions. He has studied Jungian depth psychology and universal mythologies. He has an MDiv, a THM, as well as a master's in the humanities and depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. He lives in the greater Seattle area and conducts seminars, classes, and workshops on spirituality and psychology. And his work underscores soul-making as a dynamic process that values both positive and negative emotions as normal and necessary. There is no wasted moment in a soul-making life. We are grateful you are here to bless us with the teaching that you bring and the wisdom that you are. The reading Michael has chosen for us this morning comes from the book The Soul's Code by James Hillman. Listen with your spiritual ears for what the divine will say to you through these words. This book wants to challenge the idea that the traumas of childhood ruined my life. I want to show what else is there in your nature. It wants to resurrect the unaccountable twists that turned your boat around in the eddies and shallows of meaninglessness, bringing you back to feelings of destiny. For that is what is lost in so many lives, and what must be recovered, a sense of personal calling, that there is a reason I am alive. Not the reason to live, not the meaning of life in general, or a philosophy of religious faith. This book does not pretend to provide such answers. But it does speak to the feelings that there is a reason my unique person is here, and that there are things I must attend to beyond the daily round, and that give the daily round its reason. Feelings that the world somehow wants me to be here, that I am answerable to an innate image which I am filling out in my lived biography. The soul of each of us is given a unique Daiman before we are born, and it has selected an image or pattern that we live on earth. This soul companion, the Daiman, guides us here. In the process of arrival, however, we forget all this took place and believe we come empty into the world. The Daiman remembers what is in your image and what belongs to your pattern, and therefore your Daiman is the carrier of your destiny. May this reading stir within you the great desire to connect with and live out your deepest destiny. And for today's affirmation, I will read it through first myself, and then we will all stand as able and affirm it together. You can read from the screen. It's always printed on the back of the card in the bulletin insert, too, if you would prefer to read from there. Love always finds me as I rest in every moment, present to the full experience of life. I trust the universe. I trust love. And I wait with an open and loving heart for all good things. And so it is. Please stand as able. Love always finds me as I rest in every moment, present to the full experience of life. I trust the universe, I trust love, and I wait with an open and loving heart for all good things. And so it is.
Good morning. You know, I've known Patrick over at CSL for the last couple of years at least, and I didn't even know he did that. That was really, really nice. I mean, I just learned that he's been an actor for many years and so thank you. On the slides, I guess you're going to move them for me. All right, so the first one, can you just kind of skip through it? And if you can speed read, but just go ahead and zip through. All right, to go to the next slide. Keep going. All right, now, can you darken it? Can you darken it? No? All right, never mind. Good morning and welcome. What I want to do this morning is introduce you to this, the ideas, not the book, but the ideas in this book, James Hillman, The Soul's Code. It can be categorized. You can find it in lots of different sections in the bookstore because there's no section for it. It's not really a self-help book because it, in some ways, is actually saying that the self sometimes gets in the way of the soul's code. That the self is the servant of the soul. That'll make more sense, hopefully, soon. It doesn't really fit into psychology because it questions a lot of modern psychology with all of its statistics and its labels. It doesn't denigrate them, but it suggests that the soul is more than statistics and labels that we psychologists sort of put on our maladies and our disorders. The idea in the soul's code is simply this, that each of us, maybe, perhaps, comes into this world with not only a genetic code that gives us our physical identity, the way the body turns out through the encoding, but that we also come as little soul embryos. Imagine that for a moment. Most of us, I think, when we think of soul, we think of it as something that sort of comes already formed, and we sort of participate with it throughout this life. That's one, it's a good idea. But Hillman suggests that maybe the soul, just as the physical egg and sperm come together and develop over time and circumstances, perhaps the soul comes into the world as well with each of us, and alongside the ego and in the soil of this world, the soul develops determined by the code that is within each of us at birth, that there's a purpose for each of us to be here. Now, let me give you an idea of how this played out for me. The first time I read this, it sparked a lot of thoughts. And Hillman talks a lot about the soul's code will manifest itself, especially as we get older. I see a few of us here are. The idea of reading life backwards, that oftentimes when you're in the younger years, the teens, the 20s, the 30s, even the early 40s, life sometimes just looks like a kind of a big problem or a great big pleasure ball. It depends on the day, right? But then it's kind of confusing, very stressful, very difficult. But then you start getting up into 45-ish, 50 and on, you start to look in the rearview mirror and go, some of that crap that hit the fan was fertilizer. And that there was something going on that had a sort of puzzle already on the box, that now I'm starting to see it coming together. That's the soul's code. For me, it looked something like this. When I was growing up in Enumclaw, my parents were very busy. They built a store, a little convenience store and a gas station, and ran that. And then they would take any money they made and they would buy houses in the neighborhood and then fix the houses up and rent them. And that was just the life I was raised in. My father was a sort of functional alcoholic. He drank a lot, but he got up and went to work and worked hard. My mom worked hard with him. Now, when it came to religion and spirituality, there was none. It wasn't anti-religious upbringing. It wasn't pro-religious. It was just nothing. But I remember at least four instances of religious experiences from very, very young, and I didn't know why they impressed me. You ever have images in your mind that you can almost like a photograph recall it? Just little snippets, and maybe the only thing you can remember from that age 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever, the little photographic images. Hillman suggests that those images that are captured by the camera of the angel or the Daiman that accompanies us, and it captures them and brings them to mind because it says, this is an image that has something to do with your soul's destiny. We remember it not by chance, but because there is some reason for remembering it. Here are my memories. About the age of 6, I remember going into my parents' bedroom, and on the bed there was a Bible. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I learned many years later that my grandmother had given it to my dad because she found it in a closet somewhere and said, look, this is the family Bible. It was only there for a couple of days before it left the house. But I remember sitting down on that bed and opening this book, and it was one of those illustrated Bibles. And there was a picture of David and Goliath. and Goliath was lying on the ground without his head, and David had his foot on the chest of this giant, and a sword and the severed head of the giant. And it wasn't the gruesomeness of the thing that struck me, but for some reason, that image stuck with me my whole life. I don't know why. And then I had some neighbors, this is about age 9, maybe 10, some neighbors who one day invited my brother and I to go to Sunday school with them. And there's a little Methodist Sunday school in the town next to us, White River, Washington. And I remember walking into that room. I can still see the walls. I can see the pictures. I can see Miss Houston, the Sunday school teacher. I remember the little Jesus pencil they gave me. And all this is like a snapshot. Why? About the age of 11, I remember visiting my grandparents down in southern Washington, and they went to this little Presbyterian church, and I can still see that sanctuary and the images in that sanctuary, walking into it and being somehow impressed. Now, I use that word carefully because it means to press in. Soul's code. Now, at the age of 19 and a half, I was going to college and had a grade point of about 1.5 and had absolutely no idea why I was existentially on this planet. I wasn't unhappy. In fact, I was having a lot of fun, a lot of partying. That's why the 1.5 grade point. But both of my parents became Christians, and I won't go into that story, but just in a matter of about a 6-month period when I was 19 and a half, both my parents became Christians. And our house changed radically. I was living at home at the time, driving to the college, and I remember this experience wondering what in the hell is going on in this house. My dad quit drinking, they quit fighting, they started getting along together. It was like a miracle took place. I knew nothing about it. I pulled out a little green Gideon New Testament after about a month or so of this insanity, religious insanity that was going on in our house, to see if I could maybe read this book they were talking about to make sense of it. I read through the Gospel of Matthew 3 nights in a row. The third night I completed reading the Gospel of Matthew. I closed it with no real memorable impression, put it on the nightstand, turned the light off, lying on my back. I remember my hands were folded, and all of a sudden I heard this. It wasn't audible, but it was very clear, said, "Believe." And I remember, again, just telepathically responding, "Believe what?" And it said it again, "Believe." And I folded my hands consciously. I looked out the little rectangular window on the wall at the other end of the bed, out into the night sky, and I said very profoundly, "I believe." And I went to sleep. The next morning, I got up, had breakfast, walked out to my car. It was December 21st, which is a very auspicious date. December 21st was at night, so it was December 22nd, that morning. I walked out to my car. I stopped in mid-stride, and I looked up into the cloudy Washington sky, little blue here and there, and it was like all of a sudden, the whole world came together like many disparate puzzle pieces into a whole. And it was so clear that it was all connected, and this thing came over me and said, "You are one piece of that puzzle, and I have something for you to do." Now, over the next few months, my grade point went from 1.5 to 3.8. I had this compulsion to study the Bible. I went off to a Bible college in Montana in the mountains for 4 years and was in bliss as I read the scriptures and prayed, studied philosophy. Now, Hillman would say, as this book, The Soul's Code, suggests, that one of the reasons so many of those little religious experiences that I just told you about through childhood stuck with me is because what he calls, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, the Daiman, or the guardian angel, or what the Romans called the genius, that accompanies each of us into this world, was impressing these moments on me because it was encoded that somehow to have something to do with this Bible and this Jesus thing. If somebody had told me the day before when I was 19 and a half, somebody had told me that day, "You're going to go to a Bible college and you're going to become a minister and you're going to go on and study the Bible and teach and blah, 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 blah," I would have said, "You are out of your mind." Literally, it was not even close to being on the map. My trajectory was to be the next Rod Serling. I was going to take my 1.5 whatever, grade point, and go out and write all these amazing stories of mystery. Well, mystery was there too. So even my obsession with Rod Serling was part of this bigger religious spiritual call. Hillman suggests that every single person that comes into this world with a code, a soul's code. There's something in us. But we cross the river of Lethe, as the Greeks say, and we come into this world and we forget. We don't know about this code, but it's always moving us. It's always guiding us. Let's go to some of the slides here. Hillman says it like this. He said, each person comes into this world encoded with a call, a fate, and a unique character. The aim of existence is to experience your own soul's unfolding. Now, this is not call in the sense that we usually hear it today about vocation, the way you're going to make money. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with that thing that you are about in this life. Now, one of the chapters in the book looks at the idea of our sort of obsession with celebrities, and that your call, if it's not great and Oprah-worthy, it's not a real call. No. The call may take you anywhere from the lowest poverty to the highest wealth, or anywhere in between on the scale. I remember when my children were born. For those of us that have children, if you were there at the birth in those early years and observing them, you know that each of them comes into this world with their own little character. From the womb, from the birth, from the moment they come out. I remember my oldest daughter, she's about 7 or 8, I asked her, I said, what do you want to do with your life when you get older? Just kind of playing. And she said, Daddy, I want to be a mommy. I remember thinking at the time, being a sort of liberated guy, it's like, what? Come on, something bigger than that. So I asked my other daughter, she was about 2 years younger, about 6 or so, and she said, Daddy, I want to be an actress, and I want to travel the world. I go, that's more like it. Well, both of those little codes in those little children have come true. The oldest daughter has married an amazing man. They have had 4 children. She has a degree. She's in business. She has chosen to stay home and be a mom. It's her choice. Hillman would suggest that Daiman, that genius, that guardian angel, that twin, as the Gnostics call it, the twin that accompanies each of us into this world, that nudges and moves and pushes and urges us, has urged her toward the code of experience that she has been called to experience in this life. And the other daughter, the same. When she was 6 years old, just before I asked the question, the daughter that wanted to be an actress, I remember she was doing Calamity Jane in her first grade class. Her mom made this little, outfit, the leather thing and the little gun and the whole thing. And she was up there doing this play, and she pulls out her gun and makes a joke, and the whole crowd laughed. And I have her videotape, and her little face went from puzzle to, I like this. And that night when we came home, she said, Daddy, when I grow up, I'm going to be an actress. She got a degree to go to theatrical school, and anyway, the soul's code. So it doesn't have to be grandiose. Being a mommy, being the president, it doesn't matter. But it's unique to each of us. Next slide, please. Genetic code is for our physical unfoldings. We don't have any question with that in our scientific, technological world. We all know that the genetic code is the key to our physical existence. But what about the soul's code? The soul has its own psycho-spiritual unfoldings. Now, if that's true, then we are not here alone. Do you understand? We're not here alone. This is why it's not a self-help book. Because self-help suggests that there's something I have to do to make this happen. There was no self in my moving into this Jesus experience and Bible experience. There was something that was in me that almost shoved me over the cliff into that. And that's when you know the soul's code is working, because you find yourself married to someone thinking, how in the hell did I get into this marriage? I'm saying that negative and positives. How in the hell did I end up in this job? And I can't escape it. Right? Hillman would suggest, and he's going to appeal as we look at the book, to the myth of Ur. Any of you familiar with the myth of Ur? Let's go on. Well, let's read Hillman one more time. He says, each person also enters this world with his/her personal soul guide, what the Greeks call the daimon. The acorn theory is another term that he uses, that each of us, I love this image here. Can you see this? Image of this human planted in the soil, and the roots going down, and the stems going up into the sun. Next slide. Hillman gets this idea from the myth of Ur. Now, he doesn't use this philosophically or metaphysically to say this is the way it is. As a depth psychologist, he suggests that when writers and actors and artists imagine their expressions out into the world as myths or plays or songs or whatever, that they come from not just the brain of the artist, but they're probably channeling truths from a higher realm. So this myth of Ur suggests, Plato suggested in the Republic, this myth goes something like this. Ur is a soldier, and he goes out onto the battlefield, and he's severely wounded to the point that they think he's dead. They pick up his body, they take him to the funeral pyre, they put him on the funeral pyre, they light the fire to burn these dead bodies, and they see him moving. So they rapidly pull him off the funeral pyre. He revives. And when he revives, he gives a near-death experience, and this is found in Plato's Republic. Ur says, this is what I saw, and this is an artist's rendition of it. Ur said, in this near-death experience, I went into another world. And in this other world, I was on this great, vast plain. And people who had just died from all over the earth were gathering on the plain. And as they gathered, they were judged. They were judged for the lives they lived. And Ur said, those people who had lived very worthy, virtuous lives of caring for others and improving the world that they lived in, they were assigned to go up into the higher realm of bliss. And they experienced a millennium, 1,000 years of their own selflessness. Happy time. However, those who were judged to be selfish, evil, and, had done a lot of nefarious things on earth went down to the unhappy place. Oh, I thought it was only the Bible that taught that sort of thing. No, every mythology has something like this in it. So, Ur says, as I stood there, I noticed that not only were people going up and down based on the lives they lived, after 1,000 years, people who had spent time in the above and the below came down or up from the place that they had just spent 1,000 years experiencing the consequences of their own behavior. What do the Hindus call this? Karma. Now, the next piece that happens is really interesting. Someone came out, Lachesis, I think one of the fates, came out with this huge barrel full of what I imagine to be like about the size of a softball, and each one had a little story written on it. And there are thousands of these balls dumped out on this plain, and they're rolling all over the place. And these souls that had just spent 1,000 years in the above and the below start running around, picking up the little balls and reading the stories on them. And if they see the story that corresponds with something they think they need to learn based on karma or their past lives, they take the ball over to Lachesis and say, this is my lot. He said these people, as they were running around, would pick up different balls and they would read them, and then he gives the names of certain individuals. I think Achilles, the great Greek hero, picked up a ball that essentially said, you're going to go live a very plain, mundane, ordinary life. You're going to be a no-frickin' buddy. And he went, yay. I'm tired of being a hero. That was his lot. And then each one, as they read these different balls, this is the soul's code, they went to Clotho, the goddess, or the goddess of fate, who said, all right, you've chosen your lot, now I'm going to spin it out, and this is the way, essentially the parameters that your life is going to be in. You're going to have these parents. You're going to be in this geography. You're going to be in this town or this place, or, you understand? You're going to have these siblings. You're going to have these friends. You're going to go to this school, whatever. These are going to be the general parameters. You will have a free will. You'll be able to make choices, but there's going to be a general lot, or a sort of paradigm is the word that's used in Greek, paradigma. A paradigm or a pattern that your life is going to be into. And there are going to be times you feel like, I'd like to get out of this, but it's almost like fate is carrying me through it. And then Ur said they went to the third of the fates, and it is Atropos, and she is the one who cuts the thread and says, now you're going to the earth. Slides. Zoop, zoop. Did you see them? Where'd they go? One went to Enumclaw, Washington, and was born to a family with a grocery store. Blah, blah, blah. That's the soul's code. And the idea is that every single one of us, and again, this is not literal, so don't go out of here saying, well, Mike believes that, we came from this place and we came. I don't know what I believe. But I believe this, as Plato said, this myth may not be the truth, but it's something like it. And that, as Hillman says, the phenomena of my life as I get older seems to indicate that there was something more going on than just Michael wandering through this world. That there is a pattern. And that pattern in the early years can feel almost the opposite as when you get older and your life begins to unfold. Because Hillman suggests that for many of us, that early childhood, the paradigm or the pattern or the code that is in us is so big that we are terrified of it until it comes into being. I was a very quiet, very bashful young person. If somebody had told me in junior high or high school, you're going to spend most of your adult life standing in front of people talking and teaching, you know what I would have said? No way. It's the last thing I'm going to do. But at the age of 19 and a half, when that soul's code popped open, it basically led me and said, you are now going to go on this path. And if you're in the code, you know, because there's a part of you that loves it and can't help but do it, and another part of you that dreads it. Because Hillman says, in the ego, the code is always too big for us. It's a big thing. That's why we're never satisfied, because the soul itself that comes out of the gigantic above comes and says, you're going to do something big. You're going to raise 4 children. Or whatever. Next slide. Very quickly, some images that show this from different mythologies and different movies. This idea in Greek mythology of a daimon or a genius, or what the Japanese in Shintoism call a kami, kamikaze, a leading spirit. Christians call it a guardian angel. No, get back. Thank you. Zephyr in this is the wind, and this is the daimon. The Romans call it genius. We use genius as a sort of intellectual label, but the Romans, when they said this is your genius, meant essentially this is your guardian angel. This is the thing you are. This is the thing that's carrying you through life, carried you to meet this person. You ever wonder why you walk into a room full of people and you look at a certain person and go, that person interests me? Or you look at a certain president and think, that president annoys the out of me. And it could be either party. Hillman would suggest that's because that daimon, those zephyrs, those things that are carrying us through life say there is something for you to learn from that person. That's why they strike you in such a negative or positive way. And if you spend all your life projecting and trying to push them away, guess what happens? They just come bigger. Another image of the daimon carrying us through life, please move to the next slide, is in Philip Pullman's The Golden Compass. Anybody read this or see the movie with Nicole Kidman? It's an amazing movie. If you look at it, you see each of the characters in this movie have little animals with them. These little animal spirits are their daimons. And they guide them all the way through the movie, moving them into this situation and to meet this person and to move into this area. Next slide. We see it in the movie Pan's Labyrinth. Anybody seen this movie? Del Toro. Amazing. If you have not seen this movie, the Spanish Civil War, Ophelia, who is the heroine of this story, who's come from another world, and you'll see this in the movie, in her journeys meets what is first looks like an insect. And this insect flies and moves and guides, and she follows it. And wherever she follows it, it takes her to her destiny. As the movie proceeds, this little insect turns into a fairy. It becomes her daimon, her genius, her guiding spirit. A fascinating movie that shows possibly our lives are not just things that happen haphazardly, but that there's some purpose in it. Next slide. Chronicles of Narnia. You remember Mr. Tumnus if you've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. When little Lucy goes into Narnia, she gets the daimon that guides her all the way through the story. Next slide. Toto is Dorothy's daimon. Toto is now my favorite character in The Wizard of Oz. He is the little, unassuming, almost invisible character that is the key to every change in Dorothy's life. It's so fascinating because we think the story's all about Dorothy, and it is. or all about you, and it is. But it's also about that daemon, that little dog that leads us into the strangest places. Next slide. We see it as little Toto in the very beginning of the movie in black and white. The old evil school marm, right? Comes and tries to take the little dog and succeeds. Puts the dog in the basket, rides off. What does Toto do? He jumps out. He rides home, or runs home. Dorothy picks him up. They're going to kill him. Picks him up, and then what does Dorothy do? She packs her suitcase and leaves and goes out and meets the wizard and gets conked on the head and gets off. If it hadn't been for Toto, none of this magic in Oz would have happened. Move on. In the witch's castle. How many of you have been in a witch's castle? Think you're never going to get out. And then something comes. In this one, Toto jumps out of the basket again. There's something about baskets in the Daiman. They're hidden until they're not. They pop out, and they lead us to places that we would have never imagined going. Leads her out of the castle. Next slide. Pulls the curtain back. If that curtain hadn't been pulled back, the story would have really been pretty boring. The Daiman has a way for each of us of exposing us for who we really are. You ever have those experiences where you feel like you've just been taken apart or something's just been pulled open, you've been revealed, and it's the most horrible thing in the world until it's not. In fact, in retrospect, you go, that divorce, that loss of that job, that death of that child actually made something that would have never been made if I hadn't gone through this experience. And then finally, in the very last scene of the movie, when Dorothy's ready to go home, she's standing in the basket with little Toto. She's always got Toto. The Daiman's always with us, unassuming, almost invisible. Dorothy looks out the basket, and there's a woman standing there with a cat, and what does Toto do? He jumps out to chase the cat. Damn. And what does Dorothy do? Jumps out to chase Toto. And then what? She gets left behind. Do you ever feel like you got left behind? Hillman suggests that sometimes when we get left behind, it's because the Daiman wants us to be left behind, because there's something you can't learn unless you're left behind. And that's when the slippers and the whole, she goes home and blah, blah, blah. Next slide. We see it in the movie The Hobbit. Oh, any Hobbit fans? Tolkien fans? In this movie, little Bilbo Baggins is the ego, living in the little round hole in the ground. Not a wormy hole, but a hole full of food and warmth and beautiful. That's what the ego loves, is that little round hole in the ground, doesn't it? Just leave me here. Don't bother me. Let me eat. Let me blow smoke rings out on the porch. But who shows up? Gandalf, the Daemon. By the way, the word Daemon and demon are very closely related. We'll look at that in the class, because there's a reason for that. Sometimes the Daemon can be demonic. But in this case, Gandalf comes along and he sees Bilbo. Change the slide, please. He sees Bilbo out having a smoke. And he walks up, Gandalf does, and he says, "How are you, Mr. Baggins?" He says, "I'm fine, thank you very much. What do you want?" He says, "I've come to look for someone to go on an adventure. The Daemon always takes us on adventures." Bilbo looks at him and says, "Adventure? Nasty, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner." And then Gandalf has his way and takes him off on the adventure. And Daemons often have a way of taking us. Our genius has a way of taking us off on little side roads that seem like they're taking us completely off the path out into a much larger world where we encounter dragons. But Bilbo comes home, the hero who has slain the dragon, and a thief to boot. Most of us know something about stealing things along. Anyway, another talk altogether. Next slide. Finally, Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and his Daemons. Who are they? Obi-Wan and Yoda. Daemons. This movie, without those two characters, would have left Luke Skywalker a very boring character. Next slide. Here's how Hillman puts it. Each life, whose life would that be? Your life is formed by its unique image or acorn. We're going to talk a lot about image and imagination and the imaginal realm and how it's so neglected in this modern world. Each life is formed by its unique image or acorn, an image that is the essence of that life and calls it to a destiny. As the force of fate, this image acts as a personal daemon, an accompanying guide who remembers your calling. The daemon motivates, it protects, it invents, and persists with stubborn fidelity. It resists compromising reasonableness. Nasty, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner. It resists compromising reasonableness, often forces deviance and oddity upon its keeper. You ever feel deviant and odd? Sometimes it's the daemon, especially when neglected or opposed. It offers comfort and can pull you into its shell, sometimes depression. By the way, Hillman suggests that depression is a term that we sort of need to re-examine, because depression oftentimes is really just the idea that the daemon calls us under the blankets. Do you ever go under the blankets and just feel like, I'm not getting out of bed today except the fact that there are people in the house? What will they think? Thank God when they're gone, so I can just... That maybe the daemon is saying, you need to go into the womb, into the chrysalis, because you are liquefying. And something different is going to come out of that liquefaction process, the butterfly from the worm. Go on. It can make the body ill. It is out of step with time, finding all sorts of faults, gaps, and knots in the flow of life, and it prefers them. It has affinities with myth or stories. That's why movies and good books and cartoons and blah, blah, blah are so important, since it is itself a mythical being and thinks in mythical patterns. It has much to do with feelings of uniqueness, of grandeur, and with the restlessness of the heart, its impatience, its dissatisfaction, its yearning. It needs its share of beauty. It wants to be seen, witnessed, and accorded recognition. Next slide. And I'm just going to read these to you because I'm over time. But what we're going to be looking at in this book, no, wait, just go back a little bit. Number one, in a nutshell, the acorn theory. Hillman's going to look at the idea that each of us arrives in this world as an embryo with a guide. We are not alone. 2, growing down, the necessity of the roots going down into the depths of darkness before we can move up into the light. Oftentimes, we always speak of growing as growing up. Have you ever heard anybody say to you, you know what you need to do? You need to grow down. Makes no sense. It makes plenty of sense, because there's absolutely no plant on this planet that grows up into the light without first putting its roots down into the darkness. And the darkness is part of the daemon's way of helping us gestate for the next phase of growth. Parental fallacy. This will be a relief for those of us who have children. The idea that we can't blame our parents for everything. Of course there's bad parenting. But what if, just what if, that bad parenting was part of the educational process to make my unique call come through? Back to the invisibles, the idea that behind all of reality there are archetypal or invisible presences. 5, neither nature nor nurture. This chapter has to do with the idea that it's not just our genes and our environment. Those things are important, but there's a third factor, the daemon. Penny dreadfuls and pure fantasy, the idea that we need spiritual and psychological junk food. Maybe the best thing you can do for your soul's code is to watch soap operas. Oh, but you don't admit it because I only watch PBS. Chapter 7, fate. Our desires, nudges, shoves, and accidents in life are all purposeful. And lastly, mediocrity. He ends the book by saying that just because you're not on Oprah or making $1 million, but you're living a very ordinary little life somewhere, that you're not in the midst of your daemon and genius. That there's no, this has nothing to do with celebrityhood. It has to do with your unique call. Let's just do a quick prayer with me if you want to join. Oh, wow. My daemon talks fast. Infinite One, our God, Father, Mother, Spirit, I call you by many names. I see you as the Christ, that presence that drew me out of a life of just really sort of confusion and moved me onto a path that I would have never dreamed of. We recognize this morning the possibility that there's more to this life than just happenstance and circumstance. It's my prayer for each of us in this room that we will come in touch with that guide, that twin, that spirit, that angel that becomes so close to us and so clear to us, especially as we age and move to the end, that there's no question that there's more to this life than chance. And so it is. Blessings on you.